Okay, you're good.
All right. Well, welcome everyone to the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board's OWEB's Water and Climate Committee for March 6, 2024. Really excited to have you all here. We wanted to kick it off. I'll remind folks that we're live streaming, and this is a great opportunity also for public engagement. So early on in the meeting, we'll have an opportunity for public comment, those who are watching who are interested. The other thing I'll note is that the agenda and other documents related to this meeting are on the OWEB website. And with that, let's kick it off with introductions. And I'm just going to go around the screen of folks who appear. So Brian, why don't we start with you?
I'm Brian Wolcott. I'm the coordinator at OWEB for the Water Acquisitions Program, and I also coordinate the Watershed Council and Conservation District capacity programs.
Thank you. And now also stepping in to be lead staff for this committee. So thanks for all your work. A lot of prep work went into it and really appreciate all your work, Brian. Lindsay, you're next.
Good morning, everybody. Lindsay McClary on the OWEB board, public at large voting member. I live in West Salem and I work for the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde. Good morning.
Thank you. Eric Hartstein.
Thanks, Jamie. Good morning, everyone. Eric Hartstein, Senior Policy Coordinator at OWEB.
Thanks. Renee.
Good morning, everyone. Renee Davis, Acquisitions and Special Programs Manager at OWEB.
Thank you. Bruce Buckmaster, my esteemed co-chair.
Bruce Buckmaster, a public at large member of the board and erstwhile co-chair of this committee.
Wonderful. Stephanie.
Morning, everyone. Stephanie Page, Acting Executive Director at OWEB. And as we noted before we started live streaming, I do have to hop off at 10 o'clock. So that's why I will be disappearing on or around 10.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. And then also, of course, Renee Davis is kindly going to be stepping in your stead for agenda item. Thank you. Dan Brown.
Good morning, folks. I am on the OWEB board as an ex officio representing the Environmental Protection Agency. Happy to be here today. Thanks.
Thank you. Kelly Coates.
Good morning, everyone. Kelly Coates. I'm the tribal representative on the OWEB board. I am also the Natural Resources Director for the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians, and I'm also the co-chair for the DEI committee for OWEB as well.
Thanks. Meg Reeves. And Meg seems to be, oh, there we go.
Sorry, I got a text right as you called my name that obscured my muting button. Sorry. I'm Meg Reeves. I live in Corvallis, and I'm a member. I sit on the OWEB board as a representative of the Oregon Water Resources Commission. Good morning, everybody.
And then listed as OWEB staff is none other than the resilient and ever powerful Nicole. Nicole, you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. Nicole Bettinardi, board liaison and executive assistant.
The person who makes it all happen behind the scenes. And Krista, I'll take a moment to introduce you just when we get to that agenda item, but we're really delighted that you've joined us. So thank you so much. I also, just to introduce myself, Jamie McLeod Skinner. I am the OWEB voting board member of Public at Large, live in Central Oregon and co-chair of this committee, and with Bruce, and we take turns. I'll be facilitating our conversation today. Wanted to turn it over next to public comment and first ask, Nicole, did we receive any public comments in writing? Because in this committee, we both welcome in writing ahead of time and then also during the meeting itself.
Thank you, Jamie. Actually, no one has submitted written public comment for this committee meeting.
Thank you. And are there any members of the public who wish to address this committee at this time? I'm not seeing any additional folks on. Do you know, Nicole, if anyone else is on or has flagged that they wanted to address? Okay, so then we'll move on into the heart of our agenda and start with what we call a deep dive. So just as a bit of background, we've started a real deep engagement looking at the overlap between the work that OWEB does and other state agencies, also other federal agencies as well, potentially partner agencies going forward, to really get a stronger sense of the shared impact that our organizations can have and the collaboration between organizations. So we're really delighted, Crystal, that you've joined us from Oregon's Water Resources Department. Thank you so much. And with this, I'll turn it over to Brian to lead this agenda item.
Yeah, hi again, Brian Wolcott. I just wanted to say for this deep dive topic, due to the timing of Crystal being available, we're going to start with an update on the Integrated Water Resources Strategy that Crystal has been leading for Water Resources Department, and talk about the update process and how OWEB and others can provide input and comments. And following that, there'll be a question and answer period. And then following that, I'll give a quick rundown of a summary document that OWEB staff have put together about how OWEB and Water Resources Department coordinate and collaborate on several different items as we work together on water issues. But now I'll turn it over to Crystal.
Great, thank you, Brian. So yes, this timing is perfect. I have been working on the Integrated Water Resources Strategy. That is my title actually at the Water Resources Department. I'm the Integrated Water Resources Strategy Specialist. So my primary role is guiding the update and implementation of that large strategy for the state. And we have been working over the last year plus on getting an update together. And we just released on Monday the first draft for public review and comment. So I'm going to go through a few slides here and just share with this team a few highlights of what is in that new strategy, how we're looking at things, and I'll also be showing a schedule as well, so folks can get an idea of how many opportunities there will be to provide comment. So let me share my screen here and see if this will work. And looks like we should see, does everyone see slides there? Thumbs up, okay, perfect. So I will just jump right in here to what I plan to cover. I will just give a few slides to get folks oriented about the Integrated Water Resources Strategy if you're not familiar with it. I will show the project timeline, and then we'll talk about a few things in the draft. And what I've done for this presentation is highlighted a lot of areas where there are specific actions in the strategy and where it overlaps with OWEB's work, just to help give some context there on how integrated the strategy is. And then we'll have some time for questions and discussion at the end. So just jumping right into the basis of needing a strategy. The idea for a strategy came about back in 2009. Right now, we do have a revised statute that outlines what needs to be in the strategy, who needs to be engaged as far as developing that strategy. And so 536-220 is that revised statute. And I will note that there were some changes that were made in the 2023 legislative session. Specifically, OWEB is now called out in a few different places in that statute. So that's, I think, of note. And the other thing I will say that was changed, the updating frequency for this document has always been 5 years, but in 2023, it was changed to no more than every 8 years. So once we finish and adopt this current draft that we're working on here, that updating frequency will shift over to an 8-year timeline instead of a 5-year frequency. And then the other thing that did also change is the requirement for biennial work plans too. That was never a requirement in the past. So just highlighting that because that is a huge need for collaboration across multiple agencies to create that work plan. So just moving on here to letting folks know that, I'd mentioned that first legislation for needing an integrated water resources strategy was passed in 2009. It took 3 years to develop the first one. That was published in 2012. The 5-year update occurred on time for the 2017. We're a little behind a 5-year update here, just getting a draft and hopefully an adopted version out in 2024. But this will be the third integrated water resources strategy that the state has had. And how do we use the integrated water resources strategy? I think this is a good thing to answer here because it really varies, and honestly, the audience is wide and broad. So the audience could be the public trying to understand what we all need to be doing to help better understand and meet our water needs. It's for stakeholders to use to ask for support funding or policy requests. The legislature can also reference it and see what our roadmap is for working on water problems. So there's just a lot of different utility for this document. And there are two goals I've kind of alluded to so far, but I wanted to write these out for folks because this is a very high level strategy. We've got two very big goals. One is to improve our understanding of Oregon's water resources, and the second is to meet those needs. So everything that occurs in the strategy, all of the actions are really nested under these goals, trying to accomplish these goals. So in addition to that, we've also got objectives. So again, the actions are all trying to meet these objectives here. So these objectives, the first three of them are really about understanding our resources and needs. And then the last objective there is meeting our in-stream and out-of-stream needs, just echoing essentially that goal too. So as I had mentioned, we've been working on this update for a bit. We spent 2023 doing public outreach and engagement. We did start drafting that draft in 2023. I'll show a slide here of who was really working on that. But here we are in 2024. We've got our first round of public review. We're planning to do 2 rounds of public review and comments. So that's something we haven't normally done on this document, but it's a very concerted effort to make sure that we got it right with that revision. So we've got about a month here. We've got 5 full weeks of review happening on this first draft. And then in April and part of May, we'll be revising the document, incorporating the feedback that we've heard, and then putting on a second draft in the middle of May. And then we'll have another 4 weeks there for folks to review that. And then finalizing the document, hopefully this summer, and potentially moving towards an adoption with the Water Resources Commission at the end of the summer. That September commission meeting would be a really ideal time for adoption there. So that's what we're shooting for. And just to give folks a heads up there that this current public review window is not your only opportunity. If you do want to provide input, there is another option there in May. So just a quick mention of the teams here that we have working on the document. So I will mention that there's over 15 state agencies that are very specifically called out in the document and that I've been working very closely with in terms of making sure that their programs show up in the document and that we're describing how we work together and looking for opportunities to improve that collaboration. So the state agency project team, that first list here is really the very small list of, I would say, authors that have been spending the most time on the document. But in addition to that, I've been working with many other state agencies and federal agencies as well. So getting a lot of input from state agencies across the board. I'll just dive right into the draft so folks can understand what is in this document. Some changes that we were planning to make between the 2017 version and this 2024 version, increasing the focus on equity and environmental justice, taking a hard look at some of the actions that we are carrying forward from the 2017 version and looking for ways to elevate some equity and environmental justice opportunities. Also taking a look at climate change and how we can weave that into essentially all of the actions that we have. There are very few actions that we have in the strategy that don't have a climate component. And then the other thing that we're trying to do is pull in the 100-year water vision work that was done in 2020. There's a lot of overlap in terms of content and approaches and talking about problems that we have that just are really very salient to the 2024 version. So this document here, this 2024 IWRS, is marking the combination of the 100-year water vision, all of that work that was done, and folding it into the integrated water resources strategy. We will not be carrying forward a separate 100-year water vision process. It's just too challenging to have to carry forward 2 water initiatives given just the staffing constraints that we have. So we're combining that into one. So this is the first integrated water resources strategy that will have that kind of as a milepost there. And then, of course, we've also got, as far as engagement goes, we are, in addition to the public review and comment, we are engaging the Water Resources Commission. At every meeting, we've been talking about the integrated water resources strategy and folding in their input as we go along, and then also doing presentations to various boards as well to keep all the different agencies up to date on what this next version is going to look like. So where did that land us with our new version? We've generally made minimal additions and deletions as far as actions for this document compared to the 2017 version. We are making an attempt to make it easier to find actions. So that's, I think, the really big change that I hope folks see when they look at this document. We're trying to locate similar actions next to each other and making it easier for folks to find an action that they care about or something that they would relate to a problem and a solution. So we've now reorganized the actions. We now have 47 actions in this document by 4 different types of actions. So funding is a type of action, partnerships and planning. There were many actions that we had in that last, in the 2017 version that really fit under that category. We also have a lot of data and analysis needs too. And then finally, stewardship is kind of our last category of actions. All the things that we can do to take care of our water. So here is the latest version of the framework, which is essentially a 1-page piece of paper that crams everything that's in the strategy onto 1 sheet of paper. So we've got the goals and objectives here. We've got all 47 actions that we're calling for. And I've got those organized by chapter here. So the green headings, chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those are the action types that I just described. And so you'll see all of these actions, they've got numbers next to them. We are also carrying forward on this diagram and also in the draft version that's available online. You can see in brackets there the 2017 action number because we have changed, because we've changed the order of actions and how we're grouping some of them. That means that we did need to change the numbering as well. So if folks here are really familiar with a particular action from the 2017 IWRS, you'll be able to see where that landed here and connect that. So now I'm just going to go through some content of the integrated water resources strategy, just really staying at that high level, the action level, and just mention a few elements that relate to OWEB work. So that first category here that we had about funding, there's really just 3 actions. They're very high level. One is being, calling out that we need to fund the development and implementation of the IWRS. The second action being that we need to fund our water resources agencies and all of their water resources management duties. So that clearly, I think, links up with OWEB there. And then that last action being investing in planning, feasibility, and water resource project implementation. So just calling out the fact that we need to fund the doing of the water activities. So for example here, feasibility studies and water resource projects, restoration projects would clearly be linked there. So OWEB grants would be a funding source. And we have a lot of other agency programs as well that would be supporting these 3 different types of activities: the planning, the feasibility studies, and the project implementation. So then moving on to the partnerships and planning part of the document. So all of these actions having a really strong partnership or planning component. We've got education and outreach. It has several actions there, and I'll just call out that the first one, it's promoting community education and outreach. And so soil and water conservation districts and watershed councils are called out specifically in that action as a really important element to having folks on the ground and connecting with community. And then I'll also mention that second category here, coordination and collaboration, several actions that we have in that category. Improving state interagency coordination is a specific action that we're calling out. It has been in all of the strategies in the past, but I think that's just an important one to elevate there. as we talk about how we can have our multiple agencies that all have an interest in water, how we can better coordinate. Right, and then moving on to our second slide here for partnerships and planning, we have 3 more categories: water planning, land use planning, and then the last one there being natural hazard mitigation planning and extreme events. So water planning, of course, OWEB has a strong role in that and working with other agencies there. Land use planning primarily is discussing a lot of the Department of Land Conservation and Development roles and that relationship that occurs in the state between that department and our local governments. And then that last category there, the natural hazard mitigation planning and extreme events, I think a really good OWEB nexus there is promoting resilience. So different actions that we can do to help prepare us better for drought, wildfire, floods, things like that. I think that's really kind of the take home for those actions. And then moving on to a different category here. So data and analysis, we've got several actions that fall into this category. The first action that I've highlighted there in red is improving water resource data collection. So that's a pretty high level action that's really meant to be addressed at the state level, so across many agencies. The Oregon Watershed Restoration Inventory is called out specifically in the strategy. And then I'll also flag Action 7C, which is Enhanced Interagency Data Coordination. The stream team is called out there, and that the monitoring strategy that was produced in 2017 is a really helpful resource for folks there too. And then just moving on to the last category of data and analysis, we had 2 other categories here. I'll go back 1 slide, sorry about that. In-stream and ecosystem water needs is another data category, so kind of more on the need side of things rather than kind of understanding the resource that we have. That's more looking forward, what do we need to support these systems? So this last action item here being, what do we need to support our out of stream water needs? So improving water use measurement and demand forecasting being kind of the crux of those actions. Then I'll just move on to the last category here that we have, which is stewardship. So I've got a couple of slides here for this category. We have several actions here under healthy ecosystems. I think all of these very clearly align with OWEB's work. It's really talking about how we can improve, protect, and improve the ecosystems that we have that are doing so much for us. So that first action is at a very high level, really talking mostly about restoration and protection at the watershed scale. And then we things get a little bit more specific in terms of the actions down to including just getting a little bit more specific on in-stream habitat, fish passage, things like that, additional in-stream protection. So this action 10C talks about a few different ways that we have to protect our in-stream needs here, but most specifically asking for in-stream water rights. I think that's a strong ask that's associated with that action. And then preventing and eradicating invasive species and protecting our groundwater are the last 2 actions there. So all of those, I think, very clearly show a strong connection between the Water Resources Department, or Department of Water Resources, and OWEB in terms of work that they do together. And then finally, the clean water section, we've got several actions here that relate to protecting our water quality. And so that first one is focusing on drinking water, and a strong call is really made in the document there to highlight all the things that we can do to protect our drinking water sources, and land acquisition just happens to be one of those. So I've just flagged that because I know that OWEB has specific grant opportunities for that component there. And then moving on, I've just got 2 more slides of specific actions, but the second to last slide here is the water use and management series of actions. So this group of many actions, really a lot of them are, I think, the more common actions that folks have mentioned when they think about what can we do to help our water resources. These are the actions that address water conservation, water reuse, and storage. So those come up a lot, especially during public outreach and engagement. We heard those the needs for those actions quite often. And then I just wanted to also flag action item 12E. The name is a little maybe not as straightforward as it could be about what is in that action, but it's really the approach there is saying we have a lot of regulatory tools already, but we also know to solve our challenging water issues that we need some non-regulatory alternatives, some creative solutions. So voluntary and market-based approaches are really covered under that action item. And the last two I'll mention are very agency-oriented actions, just calling for the need to have adequate field presence. We have a lot of responsibilities on our different agencies, state agencies, as far as water distribution, resource management. And so making sure that we have adequate amount of people in the field has been an ongoing challenge. And then of course, that last action item there is just acknowledging our permitting system that we have in the state. And we have a lot of different quantity and quality permitting programs, and we need to support those to continue protecting our water quantity and quality. All right, we made it to the last slide here of all the detailed actions in the strategy. So the last two categories here are water infrastructure and water and energy. So the types of actions that you can expect to see in those categories are really talking more about the gray infrastructure, but also it does make mention of the natural infrastructure as well, and the large range of infrastructure too. It doesn't just cover dams. We're also talking about water, drinking water systems, and wastewater systems, both municipal scale and at the septic, on-site scale as well. So just elevating the need to continue to support maintaining and upgrading. And sometimes we do need to decommission infrastructure. So dams and levees would be, I think, and culverts are some examples there if folks are curious about what the decommissioning component is. And then the last category there, we have water and energy. So a couple of actions, one of them really highlighting the need for some non-traditional hydroelectric power. So folks that are working on coupling maybe a piping project for an irrigation district with some microturbines to produce some power. That's the type of project that we're highlighting there. And then the very last action item there would be promoting strategies that increase and integrate water and energy savings. So very high level, there are a lot of different things that we can do that connect both of those things. Often if we're saving water, we're also saving energy just in how we, as a state, how we use energy to move water around. So that is the quick summary there of all of the actions that I have. Hopefully I've kind of piqued a little bit of interest there and just in terms of how it relates to work at OWEB. And then the last thing I did want to cover so that folks are familiar with this when they take a look at the draft is that we have something new that we're incorporating into this document, which is action summary sheets. So in the 2017 IWRS, so I had mentioned that we're consistently carrying forward the action items from 2017. We've carried forward most of those. In the 2017 document, if you were reading the document, you would see a few bulleted items about examples that are a little bit more specific about how to carry out that high-level strategy action. So what we've done for this 2024 version is we've taken it a little bit further in terms of giving folks more detail because we did notice that there were some questions about who would be the best fit for doing this action and what resources are currently available and is there a funding source that could support that. So all of that type of information we've now put on an action summary sheet. So this is just an older draft here that I flashed up on the screen for you. We've got these distributed throughout the 2024 draft. Right after you read about an action, you will see at the end of the section multiple one-page summary sheets. It gives you the likely lead agencies or supporting agencies. Those could be state or federal. And then, of course, partners that would be critical as well to include on that type of action. A very brief description of why we need the action and then example actions that would help folks understand a little bit more about how that action would be carried out specifically And so that is a component that we spend a lot of time getting input from, very specifically from agencies. So agency-specific programs are called out there because that was really helping to kind of tie the two things together. This high-level action that might need to be accomplished by many different agencies, if we can write down some specific example actions and make it a little bit more specific and real, that also helps with implementation, but also will help us a lot when we're putting together our work plans to try and figure out how to get everybody to be coordinated and working on projects together. So the last thing I'll mention that is really helpful that I've found on these one-pagers is the resources that's listed at the bottom. We have links to documents there. We also have specific agency programs that we're calling out. On some of the actions, we're flagging specific funding programs as well. And then we're also giving folks a list of work groups, because in some cases we do have already state interagency or even state federal combined work groups already working on that particular action. So I would say just these action summaries are kind of a new encyclopedia, I guess, of information, a lot of information crammed onto one page, but hopefully folks are able to get a little bit clearer understanding of what we're trying to accomplish with that action and what that would actually look like if we were going to take on that action. So those are now all in the 2024 document. I just wanted to show folks a reminder here of the timeline and just remind folks that this first round of the first 2024 draft is out right now for public review, but look for another one, another opportunity in May. All right, and that is all I had. So I'll hand it back over to Brian.
Well, thanks, Crystal. That was a great presentation and summary of this important document. And it's an important interagency tool that guides many agencies in Oregon as water is managed and better understood. And as mentioned, OWEB funds a lot of the different programs mentioned and actions that are mentioned throughout the document. And OWEB will continue providing input, both staff, but if I'd be interested to hear what comments, questions, answers, and discussion might occur now from the committee members.
Stephanie, you look like you've got your hand up first.
All right, great. Well, first of all, thank you, Crystal, for participating in the meeting this morning. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate the coordination with us and the opportunity to review various drafts. Several of us had an opportunity to review and comment on those. I wanted to just make a few remarks about intersections with OWEB. One note about the funding item, I think fairly early in the presentation, it mentioned planning, feasibility studies, and project implementation. And I think that illustrates some of the complementary programs between OWEB and OWRD. The feasibility study grant program that OWRD has, the funding for irrigation modernization that, again, complements the funding that we have available. So there are definitely programs that help achieve the same aims and complement each other between our agencies. I also wanted to mention, and Brian, you kind of covered this too, is that OWEB funds voluntary actions that help fulfill other state natural resource agency priorities. And so one way, and this is getting into a little bit the deep dive in how our agencies work together, is participation on the regional review teams and then the technical review teams for some of OWEB's statewide grant programs. So Water Resources is an important participant on those teams, and it's a way that Water Resources and OWEB work together to help make sure those priorities are incorporated into the funding that OWEB awards. And then it happens within those appropriate program sideboards. One thing I wanted to mention specifically about the drinking water item and its connection with OWEB is that we've got a new program that Renee and her team are and Eric Hartstein and RAC are in the process of working together to develop the framework for around land acquisition grants for source water protection. And I just wanted to note that that is a standalone program. That is a different program than OWEB's traditional Measure 76 land acquisition program. Certainly the traditional land acquisition program can support drinking water as well, but the first and foremost priority for that program is fish and wildlife habitat protection. But then certainly through the process of protecting fish and wildlife habitat, many of those acquisition projects do provide source water protection benefits. I think that was everything that I wanted to add, so I will lower my hand.
Thanks, Stephanie. And I also just want to say, Crystal, amazing job. I was wondering how someone would incorporate the 100-year water plan and all those into the integrated water strategy. And you just showed how it's done. So really, really incredible. A lot of interesting aspects to your presentation, but wanted to ask board members, are there any, I know this group, I know the folks are very interested in this, questions, comments? Dan, go ahead. And then on to you, Meg, after Dan.
I don't know if I just cut Bruce there. He's got his hand up. But mine kind of follows on to Stephanie, so why don't I cut Bruce and just ask it? You were Crystal, thank you. That was super informative, a lot of stuff in there. And you had mentioned under the sort of water infrastructure piece, you had mentioned sort of natural/green infrastructure. But it wasn't specifically listed. So kind of tagging on to what Stephanie was saying about the new kind of source water protection program being developed by OWEB. Is there anything like more kind of specific in there about source water protection, or not necessarily?
There is, yes. So that action, I'll say that's because, of course, we're talking about something that's very integrated right here when we're talking about protecting large watersheds. There's really 3 specific places it shows up and gets reiterated in the document. So the first one is really under the healthy ecosystem. So that very first action, that's where we're talking about, that's where you would really find those actions to protect our natural infrastructure or enhance or restore our natural infrastructure. So that's the first place. The second is under the clean water section. So action 11A, where we're specifically talking about protecting drinking water. That's the section of the document that really most specifically is trying to link funding sources for land acquisition. And I think that's the connection where that program is most specifically called out there. And then finally, that water infrastructure action, so 13A, we are making that link here that we want to, if we're going to acknowledge infrastructure as a need, we want to acknowledge that it does for Oregon. It looks both like natural infrastructure and great infrastructure. Those are both very important things. And so we're really relying most on that action 10A to accomplish that restoration, kind of that higher level watershed thing. But folks could still be referencing action 13A, the infrastructure one, as calling out some specific natural infrastructure project too that they were supporting. So there's kind of 3 different approaches that folks could to find there that would very clearly link with those types of projects.
Right on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And then apologies, Bruce and Kelly, I just called out Meg before you. So let's do Meg, then Bruce, then Kelly. Thanks.
Thanks, Jamie. Crystal, that was a great presentation. I've seen a lot of presentations on this from you, and they've all been great, but I like the way you kind of focused on how OWEB, for example, is a partner in this strategy. And what I wanted to talk about, the Water Resources Commission has been briefed many times on the development and the proposed essentially restructuring, but we haven't, until our next meeting, which is in a couple of weeks, we haven't had the actual new draft in front of us. So I'm kind of excited to be able to see that too. One thing that I wanted to maybe highlight is that in this round, funding is as Crystal said, kind of called out as its own category. And one of the challenges for implementing the strategy, which of course is an interagency strategy. I mean, Water Resources is the lead, but it involves a lot of other agencies. And a lot of the actions don't get funded. And so agencies are kind of stuck trying to collaborate, participate, and not having the funding to do what the document identifies as being their work, essentially. And I don't know, I'm hoping that maybe this can be used in a legislative context, basically, this document if you can show a legislator that the strategy that the legislature directed the state to adopt needs funding for X activity to X agency. It's just another source of support for backing the funding requests that agencies have, I think. I mean, among other attributes of the strategy, I think this is a good one. And so I'm hopeful about, we've seen a lot more funding in the last several years for water related stuff, of course, and may it continue, but that's all I've got on this. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Bruce.
Yeah, thank you, Crystal. That very informative. It was easy for me to understand the nexus between OWEB programs and the strategy. One of the questions that we often have at OWEB and committees and at the board level is what funding opportunities exist outside of OWEB. And I'm curious whether in the funding portion, the funding tasks that you had, do they identify funding programs that can inform OWEB of other agencies or other sources of funding that are complementary or would support what we're doing?
Yes, thank you for that question. So the way that we have addressed this, well, I guess I'll kind of go back to the big move that we made there on having funding specific actions. It was kind of a difficult decision there when we were looking at all of the actions that we had in the 2017 version. The funding actions were at the end of the document. And there was a need, just because of this issue that I was hearing from everyone, right? So I've been, over the last year and a half, have been, listening a lot to hear what problems do we have and what are our solutions. And the funding piece just keeps coming to the top. And it's a very well articulated challenge. And so that's why we moved the funding actions to the top, just to really hit home the fact that we can't do this without resources. And it's just, we can have the idea or, see the solution, but without the support, it's going to be very challenging. Everyone already has very full plates. So we're just making that very clear connection that resources need to be available to support these actions. So that said, this kind of catch-all action 1C that says support planning, support feasibility studies, support projects, that was very, that action item is very redundant with almost the entire rest of the document, right? We are talking about planning. We're talking about funding feasibility projects, and we're definitely like that stewardship section is really, giving you a million different things that would be considered water projects. So the action 1C is, when you see that action 1-page summary, it's gonna feel very light on the resources there. You're gonna wonder, why are there not a million funding resources listed under this one action? What we've actually done is more specifically connected them to each issue throughout the document. So for example, all of the actions that are in the stewardship section, so actions 10A through 14B, when you look at those action 1-pagers, at the bottom there, you're gonna see the funding programs. And so I think that's a really good place to see how you're gonna see the OWEB funding programs on several of those, but you're also going to see the DEQ programs. We've got GLCD's programs, and there's a lot of new ones too that have just come online. So these action 1-page summaries were really helpful way to kind of catalog a lot of that information. So I hope that that level of detail, that you're satisfied seeing that level of detail, but just know that it's from the funding perspective, you're going to see those just linked very specifically to the action itself. So action 1C is going to, we had talked about at some point having just a huge catalog of funding sources. That's a huge effort. Let's just, at this point, we're just clearly linking the available funding sources that just are really obviously associated with an eligible type of project. So you'll see those throughout the document.
Thank you. Kelly.
Thanks. Hi, Crystal. Good to see you again.
Hey, Kelly. Yeah, good to see you too.
I just wanted to say I really appreciate the amount of thought and planning that has gone into this document, and calling out the funding sources I think is huge, and linking them to specific actions is so helpful for the folks that are going to be implementing this. And I just really appreciate that. And I also wanted to say I appreciate the tribal outreach that you did. That was also very, very thoughtful and very helpful for us to understand the process, especially tying together the 100-year water vision, the tribal water task force, the place-based work that's going on. And so I just want to thank you for that. And this presentation was very, very helpful. Again, I feel like every time you give a PowerPoint, it's very thorough and really explains exactly what's going on with this. And I just really appreciate all the work that you and your team have done on this. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks, Crystal. Renee.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. This harks back to, I think, a comment that Dan made, but definitely threads throughout many of the recent comments and questions from the board. So a few kind of emerging, if you will, coordination opportunities prompted somewhat by the Drinking Water Source Protection Program, but not only that, is at the last Rules Advisory Committee meeting, we actually had public comment from a staff person at Department of Human Services talking about a water providing program they have when communities are facing, or landowners are facing, dry wells. And she just wanted to flag for us, this is out there, and there could be some confusion among folks who are facing different challenges related to drinking water, and how, I think, just flagging for us in a way that we always recognize, but prompting us to really think through, what will the interagency coordination be that is needed to better kind of string together, articulate priorities across these programs, and help point folks in the right direction. And I think that's part of the work, that we could capture these programs in a documented way, but having a contact, having a point person to help navigate that is such a key thing. And that's one thing that we flagged for moving into implementation of Drinking Water Source Protection Program. We're going to have to lean in with agency colleagues on that. And then also, and Brian, this may be getting into the more of the interagency coordination piece I know you and Crystal were talking or planning to talk about, but the follow-up from the 100-year Water Vision data portal and data integration work. One subcomponent of that is having agencies who are working on funding programs convene about how do we better integrate our information resources so that folks can know where to go, get pretty streamlined access to information about funding programs, in addition to, a lot of quantitative data, other data pieces. So there definitely is, I think, some good starting point work on that front, but we will continue to have to devote time and energy to interagency coordination to help folks navigate these programs. Thanks, Jamie.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Renee. I've been thinking that as well, and we hear all the time this sense of there's so much, this is such a broad field, and there's different agencies working on these different areas. And so where do people go for the information? And I think you captured that really well. It's also, frankly, the governor's made really clear customer service focus. And so that sense of how do people get access to information? And yeah, kudos, Crystal, for all the great work you're doing, because you've really captured it very nicely. I also was thinking about when Stephanie was mentioning the water conservation, and if you heard, OPB just had a major conversation with folks in Central Oregon about water issues and the challenges faced, and some of the programs that Stephanie's mentioning that OWEB's a part of, it was part of that solution. And so this is really an exciting piece of informing the public, but helping to share this information and understand how we maximize the allocation of public resources to be most effective in our coordination and collaboration between agencies. One of the things that you mentioned, Crystal, that struck me, and it's something we have a lot of conversations with in OWEB, is this community engagement, community education, community outreach. And we, of course, have funding limitations based on Measure 76 and other limitations on our funding, but that's something that I know a lot of board members have really leaned into and are really interested in doing. Could you speak a bit more about some of that community education and ways that we could integrate and either refer folks, especially when we're leaning into our mission to make sure we're serving all Oregonians and addressing DEI issues and engaging non-traditional partners? These are a lot of the conversations we have at the board level. If you could just share some of your thoughts on ways that we can overlap, and again, when there's things that OWEB can't do, some of the things that are happening through the integrated water resources strategy.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think this is a really good opportunity to elevate a new action. So overall, what I presented is, like I had mentioned, it's really not new information. It's just reorganizing the information. However, we do have 2 new actions out of all of the actions that we have on there. One of them I want to highlight that relates to your question here is it is lead meaningful community engagement. So it's not under that education and outreach category. It's under the very next one. And so it's under the coordination and collaboration kind of critical issue. And so that being a new action item, the reason we created that is that there is a lot of new support happening at various agencies, specifically the Water Resources Department and several other agencies. I'm forgetting the House Bill number, 3263, maybe. I'm probably misquoting that because my brain is full of so many numbers right now. But the community engagement component requirement and enhancement that all of the agencies are now being resourced to do or being called to do, but then also there are being made some resources available. That's I feel like we're just kind of launching off right now. Like that is just very new work that's happening, and specifically, with the Water Resource Department has been very involved in putting together some best practices for how to do that. So I think you'll see more resources being listed under that Action 3C by the time we have our second draft out and happening for review. But that's really where I think a lot of the resources that we would want to flag for that type of work should go there, because I noticed that as well when I was digging into all of the funding resources, is that there are a lot of limitations on funding being eligible for helping all of that really intensive work that needs to happen at the front end of pulling people together and resourcing community-based organizations too. Like that's a really difficult thing. We acknowledge that that's a need, and that's how we can get more folks to the table is if we can support community-based organizations or other voices and provide that support, we will hear from our larger crowd and actually get folks involved that are going to be impacted by water resource decisions. So my hope is that that area is really growing, and we'll hopefully have more resources associated with it as we march towards that final version of the IWRS.
Well, thank you so much. And thanks again for joining our meeting and this discussion. Really appreciate it. And that's, of course, why public input is so important to us as a committee and as a group, as we keep leaning into learning and really invite the community to educate us on that. So Meg, I see your hand. I'll also just note that, again, I know Stephanie has to step away in 5 minutes to do exactly what we're talking about and integrate and coordinate with other agencies as part of wearing her OWEB hat. So we'll go to you, Meg, and then Stephanie, if you do have to step away, then we'll just turn things over to Renee at that point. Meg, go ahead.
Thank you. I'll be quick. I wondered whether we are considering a presentation to the whole board on the water resources strategy. Crystal, I think you and I have talked about that, but I don't know if I've talked to anyone at OWEB about it. I wonder what y'all think about that.
That's a great question. Can we refer that to you, Stephanie, to follow up with?
Sure. I think one of the challenges, if I recall correctly, with regard to the time frame, is that our April agenda has is pretty full between strategic plan and grant awards and so forth. I think it's something we could look at in July, but I think the reason we wanted to have you to the committee and within this time frame, Crystal, is just because of the timing of the development of the draft, if I remember correctly. So yeah, not to say we can't have you back. It's I think it's just, this was a timing that allowed for you to engage with us when there was still an opportunity for input. Am I remembering that right?
Yes, we've been trying to connect over the many months. So Brian and I have been in coordination trying to find a window to collaborate. And so, yeah, this was the soonest that we could make this happen. And I would love to have another opportunity before we move towards adoption. I think that would be really helpful to have another opportunity to meet and talk about the IWRS.
But great. Okay.
I was just going to say, and even if we can't before adoption, after adoption, I mean, just kind of raising the profile. I'm interested in trying to raise the profile of the strategy, basically. And that's one way to do it. So,
yeah, and I think that's a really great point. Would it be possible, Crystal, for us to get access to the presentation you had, and Stephanie to maybe even send it out to the full board just for their information as an update, and to invite then board members can follow up individually, and then we can say that, as time allows, we'll try to add that as a conversation to a future full board meeting, so that there can be an engagement, whether, Meg, to your point, either before or after it's adopted, but to still elevate that information and get access to other board members. Does that sound doable? Okay, great. Excellent. Thank you again, Crystal. Really, really appreciate it. And great point. Great idea, Meg. And with that, we're almost running up against the time when Stephanie has to step away. But the next point we're going to have on our agenda was the Natural Climate Solutions Fund and OWEB's role. And so, Stephanie, I don't know if you want to start off or just turn it over to Renee on this one.
I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Renee. She's got some talking points, and yeah, thank you again, Renee, for covering for me, and thanks for a great meeting, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steph.
And again, that perfect example of that coordination between agencies is exactly what she's stepping away to do right now. So it's timely with the conversation. And thanks, Renee, for stepping in.
Yep, absolutely. So I'll provide an update. Stephanie mentioned she sent over some talking points. So this update is about the Natural Climate Solutions Fund and OWEB's role within that. So as a refresher, during the 2023 legislative session, House Bill 3409 was passed, and it funded a whole host of different climate initiatives. One specific piece within 3409 was creation of a Natural and Working Lands Fund. We, as an agency, were assigned to be the overarching fiscal agent for the fund. It did, though, establish 4 sub-funds within that, if you will, that are tapped to specific agencies. So Oregon Department of Agriculture, Oregon Department of Forestry, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and OWEB as the keeper of one of these sub-funds also. So the bill specifically stipulated that the Oregon Climate Action Commission, previously the Oregon Global Warming Commission, now renamed the Climate Action Commission, would specifically direct the transfers from the main Natural and Working Lands Fund into the 4 sub-funds in coordination with those 4 agencies. Overall, the Natural and Working Lands Fund has $10 million to work with to be distributed among the 4 agencies. So the governor's office did convene the agencies to work through what are some of the potential proposed uses of those Natural and Working Lands funds. And the agencies worked together with the governor's office to present to the Climate Action Commission in December and January, just a few months ago. And so in terms of the decisions made by the Climate Action Commission, OWEB received $2.5 million for that specific OWEB subfund. In terms of distribution for activities within that $2.5 million, $1.5 million is targeted to open solicitation work that would specifically fund restoration or technical assistance grants, $750,000 to Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program, specifically targeting the conservation management plan development and implementation piece of OHP and the technical assistance portion of OHP, and then $250,000 for administration, so essentially staff support for standing up these nuanced or refined offerings within open solicitation and OHP. So at the April board meeting, staff will request that the board accept receipt of the $2.5 million and put it in the appropriate places in the spending plan. As part of the Oregon Climate Action Commission dialogue with the governor's office and the agencies, there definitely is an expectation for outreach and engagement as all of the agencies are thinking through how to utilize the natural and working lands funds within their programs. So we as an agency will be relying on the existing administrative rules for OHP, open solicitation, technical assistance and restoration, but we will be responsive to the engagement that we have on what are some of the targeted uses and expectations per House Bill 3409. And so a few examples of some of the specific things we'll be reaching out on are the intent is to provide incentives for practices that support natural climate solutions, provide financial assistance for technical support, but it specifically states that priority will be given to expenditures for technical assistance to EJ communities and also to tribes. And another expectation from the legislation is incentives for programs or activities that are supported by an EJ community or a resolution of a tribe. So we'll want to lean in on outreach to really understand where are some of those priority areas of interest and potential investment through the open solicitation and OHP pieces. We will expect the new climate coordinator who we're advertising for as a job rotation within state government will lead the outreach and engagement on use of these funds by the agency. And at this point we don't have anyone in that position yet, but really would love committee input either now or offline. Staff has built, as you know, through the quarterly engagement through EJ communities, a good list of contacts, and we certainly could be missing some folks. So if you have ideas, we also will work with Ken Fetcho, our tribal liaison, to reach out to the federally recognized tribes. But if you do have suggestions as we're thinking forward to the outreach related to the Natural and Working Lands Funds, would love input from this committee, again, either now or later.
Thank you, Renee. Questions, comments, input? Lindsay.
Yeah, thanks for that update. You mentioned that the commission approved OWEB at 2.5 million. Is that what we requested in its entirety? And did they make any suggested changes or edits to the request?
So I've been a bit distant from this, Lindsay. I will ground truth this with others. My understanding is 2.5 million was our request, and partly that was in light of the legwork that had happened with the other three agencies, really thinking through, there are a whole host of needs across the four agencies and ways that these resources could be really helpful in getting to on the ground action on natural and working land. So I think that 2.5 million was what we always had envisioned, partly from an equitability standpoint. The one nuance, if you will, that was included in the Climate Action Commission's action is there was a statement that if needed, the agency had the ability to put more than $750,000 into the Oregon Ag Heritage program piece of the work. And so I think that was leaving space for, in the event that there is really pent up demand, getting at natural climate solutions interest, EJ tribal interest, to develop and implement, really get on the ground through OAHP, some of the potential climate solutions opportunities to create space for that rather than assuming, since we haven't deployed that system, that it can only take $750,000. We do know that certainly through open solicitation, $1.5 million probably could quickly be uptaken. But I think it was leaving space for better understanding, engaging demand and interest on the OAHP side, since that's a newer program. And Eric Hartstein, at any point, if you have history to chime in with, please do.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item? Seeing none, let's move on to the climate resolution implementation report. And this is something, and I'll talk about it a little bit later, the structure and format in terms of layout. But the idea here is almost like our next agenda item, which is kind of a standing item on intersectionality between committees. Is, you know, we've had our first OWEB's first ever resolution was a climate resolution, and the idea here was to just have updates on where we're at in terms of the process. So Renee, I don't know if this is you or Eric or Brian to just be able to touch on this and see if there's questions from committee members.
I do have brief comments from Stephanie to share. Eric Hartstein, definitely please, though, chime in if I missed anything. So in terms of where we have been around implementation of the resolution, so the board did adopt administrative rules back in July of 2023 that added the climate evaluative criteria to our administrative rules. Over the fall period, staff conducted a host of trainings to help folks come up to speed on the new evaluative criteria, and did create a number of really incredible resource materials for applicants to use to get grounded in a deeper understanding of some of those potential climate impacts and opportunities. So the first round of open solicitation grants to which the new evaluative criteria are being applied were due in October of last year. So we've been completing many regional review teams in the last few months, in which those review teams are actually looking at the content that came in related to the climate criteria in the grant applications, and comparing that to the now existing evaluative criteria in rule and in our well-loved bubble diagrams that you've seen many times as board members. So we're currently preparing the staff reports for that open solicitation grant cycle that will come to the board in April. So we don't have a lot of details yet to share, since staff reports and funding lines are still in development. But Stephanie was definitely interested in hearing from the committee in advance of that open solicitation presentation in April. Are there particular statistics or summary examples, case studies that we might provide, not necessarily at a project by project level, but just is there kind of roll up information or summary information that would help to give you a sense of how the first round of applying these criteria went, and also just to, I think, begin probably building our understanding of lessons learned as we have been implementing that. But Eric Hartstein, anything to add given your deep work on the climate criteria development? Nope.
Well, great question and prompted. Lindsay, please.
Yeah, thanks. The only thing that really comes to mind for me, I mean, it's kind of new. So yeah, we're kind of wading into new territory in terms of criteria being provided to us from applicants. But I would be interested in knowing what OWEB staff and technical review team members thought about the responses, and not like in deep detail or anything, like thumbs up, mediocre, needs some improvement. Was there anything that stood out, or was there any some of the like responses that were kind of big takeaways, or like, wow, that group really knocked it out of the park?
Excellent, thank you. Bruce, and again, we'll talk about this in a little bit in a few minutes, but really utilizing this committee to help staff in their prep work for the presentation of the full board, to have those kind of thoughts and what to really lean into in terms of presentation. Bruce.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. I was thinking along the same lines as Lindsay. I believe that each of our 6 regional representatives could probably come up with a very short example of where how the new rules have been applied within their regions and how they've been considered. So taking into the technical review teams that they work with, that Lindsay talked about. So maybe it's something along the lines of the 6 of them providing a paragraph about it for each one. That kind of report, I think, would be very helpful at this stage.
Yeah, it's part of our continuous learning. Great ad. Kelly.
Yeah, I agree with Lindsay and Bruce. I guess one question I would have for the regional review teams and staff is, did it seem like the new criteria precluded anyone from applying or affected the number of applications that we got? And did they get any feedback from applicants with questions about the criteria, or any applicants saying that this was somehow impeding their ability to apply? I'd be curious about that.
Yeah, great ads. And the only other piece I'd add, I know that a lot of work was done. Jess did a lot of work on that tool that she presented to the committee last time. Really impressive. If there's comments on that, and if that was a value added to helping organizations kind of work through the process, because I think conceptually a lot of folks are saying, yeah, that's a great idea, but help me do it. And so I thought that tool was a real opportunity to lean into that, but getting comments and feedback on that, I think would be super helpful as well. Great. Any other comments for staff of things to think about as they're drafting up the report for a presentation to full board? Seeing none. Excellent. Really helpful. Thank you, Renee, for your presentation, and Eric for all your work on this and queuing this up for our deeper conversation as a full board. And then and that going into, again, a standing item that we've added, trying to figure out how really lean into our goals and our strategic plan and our objectives to serve all Oregonians, and to make sure that we're not, our work is not becoming siloed, and that we're integrating our work. So this agenda item is talking about committee priorities, but also the intersectionality between committees. So as we think about water and climate, are we also incorporating our DEI work, our grants work? So there is in our agenda a Natural Climate Solutions Fund and environmental justice focus. So I don't know if Renee, if you want to take that, or again, either Eric or Brian, if you'll lead to that. And then just really want to open it up to the board members. Kelly, if you want to bring insights from the DEI committee's work, or Dan from from some of the other committees, please be thinking about that as Brian shares on his input on this. Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. I just put that on there as just an example topic of this intersectionality part of the agenda, but I think it was adequately covered when Renee went over the Natural Climate Solutions Fund, and that there is an environmental justice focus on a portion of those funds and how they're spent. And as we work on outreach, there's an opportunity to get more input on how that will play out.
Thank you. Other comments from committee members? Kelly.
Sure. So I can just give a quick update. We had our DEI committee meeting yesterday. So I can just give a couple of updates about a few of the things that we went over and some intersectionality between them. We got our Environmental Justice Council update. We talked about the EJ mapping tool that I see is on a future agenda item, I think, for this committee as well. So what we had, that was a standing item for us. And what we ended up doing is just, if there are significant changes to the timeline for the tool or information, then Stephanie is going to come back to us with that, but we're not going to have it as a standing item anymore if there aren't any updates to it. So we discussed that. We discussed the outreach to new partners, discussed the DEI resolution and equity statement, of course, and then something that might be of interest for this group are kind of topics for next meetings. We are going to have a presentation on the Monsanto settlement update. So that might be something that's of interest to this group as well, with the Nexus. And then updates on the drinking water source, rulemaking advisory committee and program, as well as the small grant rulemaking advisory committee. update as well. And then something that we talked about for future meetings is engaging with some of our federal agency partners to get updates on their DEI and environmental justice programs, just to see kind of how they're doing things, because we recognize that every state agency, every federal agency is doing DEI work, but how they're doing it is different. How they're rolling things out is different. So just getting a better understanding of that. So that's just, and then we'll be reporting this out at the board meeting anyway, but those are some of the things that we talked about that probably would intersect with climate and water.
Thank you. Other comments, inputs, questions, ideas for the future on this? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the next agenda item, and this is about future discussions. And Kelly, you even touched on this. So first, I wanted to just talk briefly, because there was conversations that Bruce and I had. There've been some ongoing conversations we had with Jesse, and we engaged also with Brian and Stephanie on this. And just to take a big step back, 35,000 foot look at these committee meetings. And as you're seeing the agenda items line up, I just wanted to do a quick walkthrough of how we're looking at both sharing information and also obtaining feedback from the group. So of course, we're starting out our meetings with introductions and public input, which is really key to guide our conversations. But then it's the general questions are, what are others doing? And those are our deep dive conversations, and how we integrate and coordinate with other agencies, be they state, federal, nonprofit, and look at those overlapping areas where we're serving, lessons we can learn, where there may be gaps. And the next big topic is what's not being done that maybe OWEB should be considering. And so if that's really an opportunity for an in-depth discussion on new topics or gaps, potential gaps in work that's being done, and or even identifying gaps, I won't say gaps that in what OWEB is doing, but gaps in what's happening statewide. Again, the integrated water strategy is a really great opportunity to look at water issues on a statewide basis, but to still really engage or get presentations or information on things that are happening around that we could either identify or have deeper conversation with. And some of those are also referrals, and there may be other organizations or agencies that can take them on. In some cases not, but it also, because of limited resources, it allows recognition of and an understanding of how that may impact OWEB's work. And then just the conversation that Renee was having about what's coming up to future board meetings, the full OWEB board meeting, and then what are the topics that are specific to water and climate. And this committee allows for either a deeper conversation than we might have time for at the full board meeting on folks that are really focused on these specific issues, but also helps staff and our team to queue up their presentations and their presentation to the full board in those conversations. So as items are coming up and you're thinking about things that will be coming up in the future, or also things that are potential conversations for the full board meeting, that's really that opportunity. And frankly, if there's specific items, this body can, make recommendations or include that as part of the discussion, and staff can capture that into a richer presentation of the full board. Because that's really what we've been tasked with in many ways, is do some of those deep dives into issues that are specific to water and climate. And then the intersectionality that we mentioned, the updates on the climate resolution, and then into the future discussions. So that's if you see that format, that's kind of the skeletal background to the conversations we've been having. And with that, I'll turn over to you, Kelly. But then if we want to talk through the potential items for the future committee meeting agendas, the EJ mapping tool was mentioned. There's also a list that we will have, a running list of things that have come up before, so we can reference those. And those are not in the agenda itself, but as an attachment. And so Stephanie added those for reference if you're curious about things that may have come up before, but we haven't prompted or brought forward. So with that, Kelly, do you have either questions or specifics on recommendations for future discussions?
It's actually a recommendation for future discussion or update for this group and potentially the board as well. I would be curious, and I think some of our members would be curious about the water caucus. and how that is moving forward, and just discussions that are being held at that kind of more legislative level regarding water issues in the state.
Excellent. And Renee, let me know if you need any additional or follow up on that, or if we're just taking notes on that. If you have any follow-up questions, just raise your hand or flag. Bruce.
Excuse me. Kelly started off her comment with, I'm curious. And I think that's an excellent way to get things on the agenda. And it should be from any committee member that is curious about something. For example, I looked at our water acquisition coming up at the next board meeting, and there were 3 items. One was a purchase, one was a 5-year lease, one was a payment for a voluntary program that paid when something happened. Those are 3 totally different acquisition, but they're all lumped in the water acquisition. I don't know how they're prioritized, if they are anything. So I was curious about that sort of thing. And I'm sure other board members stumble across those on a regular basis. And those are the type of maybe shallow dives that we could put on our agenda to satisfy our curiosities.
No, great point, Bruce. And so I think the way I'm hearing that is, what are the different options in terms of the strategies to address challenges that we're seeing around these issues, and then maybe to get input from staff and some of the teams working on it as to what are those options and why a certain option versus another option to address a challenge that's being faced. I think that's a really good, the understanding of the work and the queue up to the work before it's seen at the board level. That's a great input. Renee, you have a question or comment?
Well, I'm glad that Bruce asked what he did, because I had my hand up to follow up with Kelly, but now I'll follow up with Bruce too. So Kelly, did the update to LCIS help to prompt the caucus interest? And okay, so I'm seeing nodding. I think Eric Hartstein, given what we understand the presentation, I think from Harmony, but also maybe others, was at that. We can follow up. I just wanted to make sure we're aiming for the right target. Okay. And then Bruce, just to cross check. So in looking at the list of past topics, there was an water acquisitions grant program 101 last fall. It sounds like maybe we didn't go quite deep enough into some of the details of the different instruments that could come into the program. So it's kind of going to the next level, is your thinking? Oh, we can't hear you, Bruce.
Bruce, unfortunately, your sound.
Okay, are you okay?
Yeah.
So I looked at it and I remembered the presentation we had, but I thought, are these prioritized? And I don't know that we ever had a discussion. Do we prioritize a purchase of water over a lease of water, or so more of a follow-up detail sort of thing, because it's coming on to we'll have a vote coming up at the next board meeting.
Yep, it's actually in July. Land acquisition is April, water acquisition is July. So we do have a little bit of time, and the timing could be great. And Brian actually is doing a session at Connect with some nonprofits that take the lead on stream flow restoration. So it could be a nice way to kind of blend in some of that information and feedback from that particular session. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that clarification to both of you. So yeah, why one strategy rather than the other? So not revisiting the entire presentation, but really more of that that thought process that goes into what comes for us. Okay, so we've got a couple of great suggestions, and then part of this discussion also is a referral back to staff to see what is doable and based on workloads and such. The I'm sorry, the EJ mapping tool, was that already geared up? And is that a big or a small project? And then the I'm curious question, and also the legislative committee, the caucus question. Brian.
Yeah, I just wanted to refer to the environmental justice mapping tool is still in the works. It sounds like it's a bit behind schedule. And I know that Stephanie has been in touch with the DEQ staff and Oregon Health Authority staff that are involved with that. And there has been some initial discussion of a presentation on that, but it hasn't been confirmed for the June committee meeting.
Got it.
But it's a possibility.
Yeah, thank you. And then to a point that was raised earlier in the meeting, I don't know if it's helpful to see it in process or to wait till afterwards. That sounds like that's later on down the line. But then looking at the other two items on getting an update on the legislative caucus, legislative committee caucus, water caucus, and then also the approach and strategy. Are those two things that would be doable to present on at our next committee meeting?
Jamie, I would want to check back with Stephanie, but my guess is we would be relying on an outside presenter for that, so it could be more doable from a workload perspective. Eric Hartstein and Brian. Okay, I'm seeing some nodding there. And then on water acquisition and that slightly deeper dive, I'll connect with Brian. I think that likely would be doable since some of those pieces may be there. And Brian's not vigorously shaking his head, so we'll circle back on that.
Okay, thank you. So that it goes from essentially a request from the committee, and then we'll line things up. And as things are doable and presentable, we'll either at the next or future, we can, if it doesn't get on our next agenda, that it would just be added to that list of things to come when we're able to. Excellent. Any other items that are on the wish list for topics to cover from committee members or staff? Seeing none at this time. Okay, excellent. Wanted to move on to the good of the order. If there's any additional things that folks want to add, but also want to say that Brian had some really big shoes to fill with Jesse, losing. It's not a loss for Oregonians because she stepped into another organization here in Oregon, but for OWEB, Jesse just did an amazing job for us, and Brian, you stepped in and made it really seamless. So thanks for all your great work in leading up to this committee, and also Renee for you stepping in for Stephanie. But go to the order items. Anything from any of our colleagues? Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that as part of our deep dive discussion regarding OWEB and Water Resources Department coordinating, collaborating, there is a 2-page summary document about that in the materials for today's meeting next to the agenda on the OWEB website. And it's just a dozen bulleted items. We covered over half of them today in the discussion, but if anyone's interested, it's there.
Thank you. Thank you for adding that. Really helpful. And otherwise, not seeing any other comments. Again, great job, everyone. Great job always, our OWEB team. Thanks, board members, for your commitment to this work and joining us. And thanks to the public, those who joined us for this conversation on water and climate issues related to OWEB's work. We'll see you at the upcoming board meeting. Someone on staff, can you just remind the public when our next board meeting is?
Yes, I can. Our board meeting will be April 22nd, 23rd, and 24th.
Excellent. And the location?
We are going to be in Baker City.
Baker City. Awesome. Okay, well, thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.